So this was told to me by an old family friend, Nikki. She told me this story numerous times as a kid growing up, as one of those life advice type of stories to keep in mind through the years. And to her credit, I have never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, it always springs to my mind, and it probably always will. It makes me a bit ill whenever I think about it, actually. So Nikki, who grew up at the same time as my dad, so this was about the early 80s I believe, was a young woman in her mid-20s. She's one of those real kind-hearted souls, always willing to help another out in the time of need, you know? And I can't imagine her being anything other than that when she was younger, so I totally see her doing this too. So, driving into the city, about a 2-hour or so drive out from town, she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared, he turned, and in typical hitchhiker manner, stuck out the old arm and thumb. Nikki, bless her heart, pulled over and asked him if he needed any help. She told me that he was really polite, if not a bit shy, when he asked for a lift into the city. Nikki gave a smile and popped open the passenger door for the guy, who tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. They talked pleasantly for most of the trip, about friends, the news, etc. You know, happy small talk. She felt that they were getting along really well, and even bought him dinner at the pit stop a little over halfway there. She says he seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid. But one of the things they had talked about was money, and how he was pretty dang strapped for cash, which was why he was hitchhiking in the first place. But he eventually relented and they went on their way. As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and the food, and asked to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Nikki's phone number so he could contact her someday and catch up. Thrilled at the prospect of knowing how her new friend was faring, Nikki wrote it down for him and drove off, with the warm feeling of a good deed being done. Now, I'm sorry if you were expecting something creepy to have happened by now, but I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid. How nice everything seemed to have worked out. Nikki gets this crease in her forehead and a funny look in her eye when she tells me the next part. How a week later she got a phone call from her driving buddy. He didn't let her get a word in edgewise after hello, and he told her this, that she should thank God that she was raised so nice, because when he got in the car, he was planning on raping and murdering her once they got to that pit stop. That he was going to steal that car and dump her body in a ditch further down the road and go on his merry way. But after she talked with him so kindly and treated him to dinner with a smile on her face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think he could live with himself after doing that to such a nice lady. He then told Nikki to please never, ever pick up another hitchhiker. Then he hung up the phone. Nikki never got a call from him again. When she tried redialing the number, she got a payphone. And so, Mr. Hitchhiker, I know I'm never going to meet you, because I'm going to listen to the advice you gave your driving buddy and never, ever pick up a hitchhiker. I used to do a lot of hitchhiking as a young teen, around the ages of 13 to 16. I had never had any issues. A few men hit on me, but backed off when I didn't reciprocate, so it was okay. When I was 16, I got in a huge argument with my sisters and decided to walk from Corvallis to Monmouth, Oregon, a 45-minute drive, at 4 a.m. I know, stupid. Anyway, I was walking along the road and a car pulled out of a convenience store parking lot and then sped off. About a half a block later, it flipped a U-turn and pulled up beside me. It was a young guy, probably in his mid-20s. He was smoking a cigar and listening to Guns N' Roses. He seemed really nice and trustworthy. He asked if I needed a ride. I then asked him if he was a rapist or a serial killer. I always did this before I got in a car as a joke. He laughed and then said, "No, but if I were, do you really think I'd tell you that?" I said that's a good point and hopped in and told him where I was headed. He agreed to drive me the entire way, and I got really excited as I wasn't looking forward to the drive. He needed gas before we left town, so he headed toward a station, and not 5 minutes later, there were flashing lights behind us. He said he was worried because his license was expired, so I decided to just leave. The cops stopped to ask me my age. I lied and said I was 18 and gave my sister's name and birthday. He informed me that he asked me because the man I was riding with was a predatory sex offender who seeked underage girls and used weapons and violence to assault them. I panicked and split. A block later, the cops had stopped me and asked me if I was ready to be honest with them. I was, and they called my sister to pick me up while I waited, handcuffed in the back of a cop car. After that night, I never hitchhiked again.
First of all, I want to apologize for any mistakes. English isn't my first language, and even though I'll try my best to avoid it, I'll probably mess up something. This story took place 2 years ago. I was on my second week backpacking through Austria, and I reached a point where I was too exhausted to walk any longer. It was an unusually hot day. I had blisters all over my feet, and I was ready to call it quits. I was in the middle of nowhere and decided to thumb a lift to the nearest train station, but I was out of luck. I stood there for what felt like hours, and no car would pick me up. I don't blame them. I spent 2 weeks sleeping in the woods. My clothes were dirty, and I probably looked like a maniac. When finally a truck pulled up, I didn't hesitate to hop inside because I was so thankful to be able to sit down and rest my feet for a while. I asked the driver if he could drop me at the nearest station so that I could catch a train to Vienna, but he told me that he was heading back there anyway, and that he could take me there as long as I didn't mind him making a stopover to load the truck. I didn't, and so we drove along. We made some small talk, and he seemed to be very polite. It was a pretty enjoyable ride until we reached the first stop. He loaded his truck while I walked around a bit and bought some water at a gas station nearby. He had offered me drinks a few times along the ride, but I always declined because I don't feel comfortable with that. I got back into the truck, and we continued to drive to Vienna. Almost immediately after we took off again, he told me that it wouldn't be a problem for him if I wanted to take off some of my clothes since it was such a hot day. I told him that I was fine, but he brought it up a couple more times. He also asked me if I wanted to take a nap in the back, and that he had had several hitchhikers sleeping there in the past. I declined again and started to feel a little uneasy around him and planned to leave the truck. All of a sudden, he nearly yelled at me to put my head down and hide because he was driving past his stepfather's car, and he didn't want him to see me in the truck. That struck me as odd, but I did anyway because his yelling took me by surprise. That confirmed my resolution to get out of there as soon as possible, and I asked him to drop me off at the next stop, and made up an excuse that it was my goal to enter Vienna by feet, and that I was well rested enough to make it, thanks to his lift. He agreed and I got my stuff ready. He suddenly turned to me and said that I looked familiar, and that he was sure he saw me somewhere before. I shrugged it off, but he insisted that he remembered my face. He asked me if I ever went to a swinger club, because he was sure he saw me there sometime. That caught me off guard, and I told him that this was impossible, because I'd never been to one. "Well, do you want to? I'm going to one in Vienna. Let's go there together. I'm sure you'll like it." At this point, I really wanted to get off the truck ASAP, and told him that I had no intention to come with him, and asked him to drop me off now. He didn't answer, but reached into his pants and started masturbating while he drove along. I froze up, clutching my backpack on my lap, and I didn't know what to do. I kept thinking that I'd jump off as soon as he stopped somewhere, and tried to ignore what he was doing, since he didn't respond to my plea to let me out. A gas station was coming up, and he stopped what he was doing and asked if we could take a shower together. I figured that there'd be people around, and that it would make it easier to get rid of him, so I told him sure, why not. We pulled up, and as soon as he stopped, I yanked open the door and ran across the parking area of the gas station, hoping that he wouldn't come after me. He didn't, so I just kept running until the station was out of sight, and I reached a busy street. Only after my heart stopped racing and I caught my breath, I realized that I left my shoes in his truck. I walked the last few kilometers barefoot and kept a lookout for the truck until I reached Vienna. My dad is one of those people who has had about 20 different lives. Every so often, some random topic comes up, and he'll go, "Oh yeah, I almost died doing that." This is one of those stories. As a young man in the 1970s, my dad hitchhiked all over the US and Canada. He has plenty of good, bad, and ugly stories from his hitchhiking years, but this one is the scariest I've heard him tell. He was hitching with a girlfriend of his at the time. They were both in their early 20s and making their way across Canada. A car with 4 men in it picks them up on a fairly unpopulated highway. They recognize that the men must have been from a nearby Indian reservation, as they never spoke a word of English to them, just gestured a ride. My dad squeezes in between the 2 guys in the front seat, and his girlfriend is squished between 2 other guys in the back. My dad said the pickup happened very quickly. The seating arrangement not what he would have chosen, but whatever. They were getting a free ride. Then, as they start to drive, all of a sudden my dad realizes that everyone in the car is really, really drunk. The whole car reeks of alcohol, and the men start talking to each other loudly in their native language, and my dad can just tell they are absolutely wasted. He looks at the driver, who appears to be the least intoxicated, and is trying to decide how to tastefully tell them to drop my dad and his girlfriend off again, even though they had just been picked up a minute ago, when his girlfriend starts screaming from the back seat. Both of the men on either side of her had started groping her, and very roughly. She was trapped in between them. My dad turns around and starts to yell at the guys and reach back there, but the other front seat passenger, not the driver, starts to grope my dad. My dad starts screaming and swinging around at everyone, but there's not much room in the car and he's outnumbered. And the guy next to him is still trying to get into his pants. Then one of the guys in the back seat whips out a knife and holds it to my dad's girlfriend's throat. Before my dad can hardly react, the driver, remember the least drunk one, and the only one who hadn't violated anyone to this point, turns around, hands off the wheel, and punches the knife-holding man really hard right in the face. Stupefied, the guy drops the knife and everyone kind of shuts up, except for my dad, who's still yelling, and his girlfriend, who is pretty much hysterical at this point. The driver promptly pulls over, and my dad and his girlfriend tumble out of the car shaking, barely managing to get their bags out as well, before the car speeds off again. As soon as the car from hell drove off, my dad desperately flagged down the next car to come along, and told the driver what had just happened. The driver lets them in for a ride, and tells them he actually works at the reservation where those guys lived. Trying to calm my dad's girlfriend down, he told them it was unlikely the men would have actually raped her. Apparently, drunken groping was a problem on the reservation, but not rape. Whether this is actually true or not is still a mystery. But then he turns to my dad very seriously and says, "You, on the other hand, you're lucky. They found a guy out here just last week who'd been hitchhiking. Castrated."
I was a pretty brave person when I was younger, or maybe I had that sense of invincibility that comes with youth. I had survived some things. A stalker who pursued my sister and I for over 1.5 years, being sexually assaulted, 2 house fires, and growing up in a house that I swear to you was haunted. Not in that Disney way either. I'm talking torture chamber in the basement and strange things going on. Anyway, I suppose looking back, that having been through all of that, made me feel a little either like I was sort of invincible, or maybe I just assumed that I'd gotten all of the bad stuff out of the way and nothing else would happen. Whatever it was, I learned to know better. When I was 17, I didn't have a driver's license. In fact, I was 36 before I did. I walked most places, occasionally catching rides with friends, and less occasionally, hitchhiking. The night in question was one of those seldom seen occasions when I had decided to hitchhike, having worked late and being too exhausted to walk. Now, most of the time when I'd hitch a ride, I wouldn't get in the car with a lone man. Only women, or rarely men with a wife or girlfriend and or kids in the car. This night though, cars were few and far between and it was cold. And really, if I'm being perfectly frank, when he pulled over I took a good look and figured I could take him if he tried anything. He was on the slender side, and he had a strange frailness about him, even though he looked healthy enough. I got into the car after we agreed on a destination. We exchanged names and I warmed my fingers in front of the heating vent. He spoke quietly, asking a few questions along the lines if I was a local and how did I like living there. He said he'd only been there for a couple of months, but he found it beautiful and hoped he could find happiness there. That particular comment struck me as a little odd, but I brushed it off. It began to snow and the road quickly got slippery, so he slowed down and kept his eyes straight out the windshield, driving silently. I was okay with that, as small talk was never my forte. About 10 minutes later, I noticed a car near the intersection we were approaching seemed to be sliding, so I shouted, "Hey, watch out!" He immediately hit the gas, shooting through the intersection and burst out with, "Don't ever scream at me again." Needless to say, I was taken aback. I said, "Look, this is close enough. Just pull over here and I can get there." He didn't seem to hear me. Richard, did you hear me? I said you can pull over here and let me out." No response. He just stared straight ahead, driving faster now than he had been since it began to snow. To say I was scared doesn't even seem to cover the depth of the fear that began to arise in me. I didn't know if I should stay quiet or speak, but I was damn sure not going to yell after his outburst. After about a mile, he began to mumble under his breath. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying, but I assumed he was speaking to me, so I said, "What? I can't hear you." He began to speak, quietly and rapidly, saying things like, "Why are you always yelling at me? I've told you time and time again. I do not appreciate being yelled at, but do you listen? No. Well, I'm done listening to you now. Do you hear that?" I was at a complete loss. I didn't know what to say in response or if I should say anything at all. I contemplated just jumping out of the car, but I nixed that idea when I realized the door lock was missing. There was just a silver-lined hole where it should have been. I'd started to cry and debate with myself about causing an accident by grabbing the wheel and hoping for the best. At least, I figured there was a chance I'd survive that. Then, he suddenly looked at me for the first time since I had gotten into the car. He blinked several times rapidly and then slowed the car, pulling into a gas station. I waited to see if he'd unlock the doors, not wanting to say anything to set him off again. After a minute or two, he quietly said, "I think I better let you out here," and hit the button to open the locks. I wasn't about to hesitate. I jumped out of the car as if it were on fire. I was about to turn and walk into the gas station when he called my name. He looked so damn sad I hesitated. He apologized, and he said he was sorry for frightening me, that he never would have harmed me, and asked if I'd be able to get home okay. I said I would and closed the door. He began to pull out of the gas station lot, but stopped suddenly. He just sat there for a couple of moments, his head down. I froze, wondering what the hell he was up to and was about to run into the station. But he opened his window and yelled to me, waving something in his hand. My hat. I'd left it on his seat. I warily approached his side of the car, and he handed it to me, apologizing once again. I didn't know what else to say, so I just said thanks. I watched as he drove off, making sure he was out of sight before moving on, so he wouldn't know which direction I was heading. I decided to go to a friend's instead of home. As I walked, I went to put my hat back on, and out fell a piece of paper. Folded into the paper was a $100 bill. The paper said, "I'm sorry. Please take a cab and don't hitchhike anymore tonight." I didn't. In fact, it was the last time I ever hitched a ride alone.
I was a 20-year-old female on a motorway in the southwest West Midlands of England in 1990. I was what was known at the time as a crusty, though I read that they're called gutter punks in the US. I had dreadlocks, listened to anarcho-punk, and dressed in rags. I was a softie from the countryside by birth, but a couple of years in the violent Nottingham squatter scene had hardened me up to no end. I had left the squats and joined the New Age Travelers, and we were as aggressive a bunch of heavy-drinking thieves as you'd be likely to meet anywhere in the UK at that time. For this reason, I was fearless. But youth and a safe upbringing made me stupid when I thought I was streetwise. As was my habit, I'd taken myself off on my own and gone back to my hometown. Now I was hitchhiking the breadth of the country to get back to the site where my friends were. I remember waiting for my next lift at a service station when this battered old three-wheeled van pulled up. It was filthy and didn't look very pleasant, but it was going in my direction, so I was pleased. The driver seemed okay. A bit serious and intense, I suppose, but he said he could take me to the other side of Birmingham, which was very convenient for me. He was distinctive looking. This was the start of the 90s, but he looked like my dad did in the 70s, and my dad was an old-fashioned his whole life. The man had thick black hair and a bit of a quiff, and sideburns. He was also very tan, like he worked outdoors a lot. He was lean with dark eyebrows. I remember him so well because he looked like my dad and also my uncle. Maybe this was why I didn't feel less at ease with him. So we start along the motorway, and it all seemed fine. I was probably chatting like an idiot as usual, and I remember glancing in the back of the van and seeing a heap of junk in there, bulky and dirty, and some of it covered with a black cloth. He saw me looking at it and said it was equipment for a puppet show, which I found bizarre and incongruous. He didn't look like a children's entertainer. He was more of a child catcher than friendly clown. Along the road a bit, and he started asking me how often I hitch, and I let him know it's routine for me. He says, "But you don't get scared?" So I say, "No, not really." But the guy won't leave it. "You must get scared." "No, I really don't." "Why don't you get scared?" "I can handle myself." And so he goes on, and on, and on. He insists I must be scared, and asks me if I'm scared now, and how did I know I'd be able to handle being attacked? And I'm getting really irritated. A bit freaked because it seems like he wants me to be scared, and I'm giving the wrong answer. But mostly annoyed because the conversation is going in circles. Eventually, when he asks why, I reply, "I don't get scared because I carry a knife." This was true, but only a little lock knife for day-to-day purposes. Well, that stopped the line of questions. In fact, it stopped the whole lift. The guy swerved into the hard shoulder at the side of the road and said, "I'll have to drop you off here." I was surprised and a bit pissed off to be left here, but I got out and grumbled to myself as he drove off. Cars aren't allowed to stop on the hard shoulder, and people certainly aren't allowed to walk along it, but what could I do? I stuck my thumb out and started to walk. About 15 minutes later, a police car pulled up and told me off for being there, but kindly gave me a lift across to the far side of Birmingham to a safe and legal hitching spot, where I was picked up by a minibus full of pagan students who took me right to the traveler's site. Years went by. I left the sites in squats, had a baby, got a job, and the only time I thought about this guy was when exchanging hitching stories with people. This was my second favorite story, behind the one about the Christian who drove at 100 miles per hour on the wrong side of the road because God would save him. While I screamed, "I'm an atheist, he won't save me." After I would tell that story, I'd mention the mad puppeteer and his annoying questions. It wasn't until a couple of years ago that I realized the possible danger I had been in. I was watching a show called Crime Watch on the BBC, where they appeal for information, and they had a special on the serial killer Peter Tobin, trying to track his movements throughout the years. I follow serial killer stories with interest, so I'd heard of him and had seen his picture as an old man. Then they showed pictures of him through the years, and holy shit, there he was, the mad puppeteer. The picture matched, the time matched, just how he looked in the late 80s, early 90s, just how he looked when he murdered hitchhiker Donna McNichol in 1991. I work for the criminal justice system, so I have level-headed colleagues, for the most part, and told people at work, They agreed I should ring the Crime Watch number. If it was nothing, it could do no harm, but if it was something, it might really help. I rang the Crime Watch number and said, "It's probably nothing, but..." A few days later, they rang back and arranged to take a statement. A police officer came to my house and wrote down everything. A second officer came to my workplace to get more info and to photocopy a diary I kept back then. Frustratingly, I said nothing about this lift in the diary. That's how little I thought I was in danger. The Crime Watch website updated to mention a three-wheeled van, and now is reported in some biographies as fact. People ask me now if I truly believe that Peter Tobin gave me that lift. I can never be sure. But I think in my mind, I'm 75% sure I survived a serial killer. At the very least, I now realize how stupid and naive I was, feeling so tough and so fearless. Sometimes, when I think of what could have happened, I just feel cold and sick. Because of my job, I realize how many rapists and psychopaths there are out there. And I am just relieved that it wasn't my parents searching for answers about one of his victims. Too long didn't read? Silly me, age 20, gets a weird lift hitching, and discovers 20 years later that I might have had a very lucky escape from Peter Tobin.
It's 3 a.m. on a weeknight, and I'm driving home from a 15-hour shift. My mind is pretty much asleep from exhaustion, and my critical thinking skills have all but abandoned me for the night. Luckily, I only lived about 10 minutes from work at the time. Some quick history. About 3 months before this, I had a suspended license due to a legal dispute I was fighting. Being a 19-year-old faux rebel, I continued driving anyways. Of course, the law had caught up with me. I had driven home without my headlights on one night, and was cited. Pan back to 3 a.m., and I'm crossing an overpass towards my apartment. My car windows are down since I'm smoking a cigarette, and the only sounds are the rare passing cars. Suddenly, I hear a voice shout out, "Hey, lights!" I look out the window as I pass a woman carrying some bags, waving her arm at me and yelling out. I finally noticed that it seemed a bit dark on the road. My lights had been off. I flipped them on and cursed myself for being such a fool. Though in reality, this was only the beginning of my foolishness that night. I began to think to myself, wow, this woman just saved me from a ticket. A red light sits at the end of the overpass, and I see that she is walking in the direction that I'm headed. Why not return the favor? She saved me around $100. I can save her some time off her journey. Now, I lived in an iffy neighborhood. Even though it was right down the street from the college campus, it still wasn't the kind of area to be making friends with random people at 3 a.m. I looked at the woman from my car and made a quick assessment. Her clothes seemed clean, and she seemed near my age, and the bags were Kroger brand. Any other time I would have still just gone home, but my mind was set on helping this person who had just helped me, even if she was homeless, which I doubted from my assessment. I'd had experience with those types of hitchhikers before. I kept a serrated blade in my car, in case anyone I helped became unruly, which has happened twice before, always ending with a hinted flash of steel and the asshole quickly retreating from my car. My hazy mind had made itself up as I pulled a U-turn and headed back over the overpass. The woman stopped walking and looked up at me as I pulled up. She was extremely cautious as I stopped, which made me feel better since I figured a prostitute or thief would be much more relaxed. The streets are pretty much empty besides me and this woman. "Thank you," I smiled at her. "You saved me from a ticket. I've already got enough money problems as it is. I was just on my way home from work. I could give you a ride if you're headed somewhere in the area." She walked up to the car with bags in hand. As she got closer, I can tell she's a bit older than I thought. Late 20s, I believe. Maybe early 30s. Her bags are indeed filled with groceries. It still hasn't clicked that no sane woman would be walking with groceries at 3 a.m. She smiled with her lips closed and looking through the open passenger window at me. "Are you sure? I live right down this corner, but I wanted to make a stop somewhere first." At those words, my brain would normally be screaming, "Hell no." But instead, I tell her it's no problem after she helped me, and she tosses her bags in the back before getting in. Her voice has a bit of southern influence, and her hair is a little dirty. but only as if she hadn't showered in a few days. No worse. She begins to tell me that she lives in an apartment that I knew of not far from where I stopped. She then tells me that she wanted to make a stop though, as one of her friends had gotten something for her, and she was afraid her friend's boyfriend would steal it if she didn't get it tonight. More signs of, this shit is fucked up. But my brain was already half asleep. She says she needs some money, so we stop at a nearby gas station. Shoot, I thought I had more money than this. She eyes my wallet with a quick glance as I pay the cashier for a drink. I don't have much, thankfully, otherwise this story could have ended much worse. Do you think you could spare me like $10? $10 is a lot less than $100, so I handed her some cash and we get back onto the road. Most of our talking is limited to directions, but she asks if I go to college or work. Small talk, nothing personal or deep. That's when I start to notice where she's leading me. The bad part of the neighborhood. Trash is littered everywhere, shady characters are shuffling around, and it's only getting worse the more I drive. We reach our destination, where two very intimidating black men are standing outside of a liquor store. She gets out and asks me to turn around in an alleyway, and she would be back. Shit, I really fucked up. My exhausted mind had realized this wasn't a smart idea, but instead of just bailing, I decided not to abandon her. I wouldn't have found this as a good reason to risk my life if I had been of sound mind. I pull into the narrow alleyway and turn around in a small spot. I drive just enough to the edge so that I'm visible from the main street. The two men standing at the door glance at me. As I reach beside my seat to find my knife, I'm gripping it tightly as though it was some sort of reassurance that I was going to be fine. If I had been attacked, that knife was not saving me. The biggest of the two comes up to my window and peers around my car. I keep my coolest composure possible. He tilts his head up and I do the same. He asks if I'm there with the woman, and I nod once before he simply backs away. At that moment, the woman runs out and hops back into the car. She's smiling and says everything is good. I could not be happier to get the hell out of there. She ruffles through her purse and asks excitedly if she can smoke in my car. I asked if she means cigarettes, and she smirks at me, saying that she has something better. My mind jumps to weed, and without asking if it was, I tell her sure. This is where, exhausted or not, my mind finally notices that I had done fucked up. The woman pulls a small bag from her purse and a clear pipe. The contents of the bag are not green. In fact, they look completely unfamiliar to me until she pulls something out. Fucking crack. Fuck. I picked up a fucking crackhead. I am so fucking dead. She is going to kill me, steal my car, money, identity, and then sell my organs for drugs. My mind is racing so fast that I don't even notice that she has been holding the pipe near my face for a moment or so now. Hey baby, you gonna hit this or what? I snap my focus to her and my stomach turns a little. I see her teeth for the first time, yellow as the sun and brown as dirt. I try to think quickly, but my brain hasn't been functioning enough to stop all this from happening, let alone get me out of it. I've done crazy shit before, but this was too much. If I deny her, will she get upset and attack me? I don't want to smoke crack. My hand finds its way to my knife handle. Am I going to have to murder her? What do I do? I look at her for a minute and then shake my head, keeping as cool and as calm as I'd been all night, even though I was literally freaking out on the inside. No thanks. Drinking and smoking cigarettes are enough vices for me. She laughed, and it takes me by surprise as she shrugs her shoulders. We all got vices, she says before taking another hit. I know how it is, baby. I exhale a huge breath of relief. This may turn out okay, I think to myself. As we drive, keeping a hand on my knife and the woman firmly focused on her drugs, the road is empty. We get out of the bad area without problems, and I feel like I'm home free. A moan comes from my passenger, one that would have made my hormones jump if it were from anyone else, but instead sends a sharp pang of terror through me. I look out of my peripheral vision to see the woman with her head tilted back, blowing another hit, and moaning as she exhales. Shit. She smirks, eyes closed and feet stretched out as far as possible. He gave me them wicked rocks. What? I ask, letting my fear come through more than I would have liked. Wicked? Were they laced? Was she going to OD in my car? Oh, right. You don't go for rocks. She opens her eyes coyly at me. It's that good. She says matter-of-factually, like I'm supposed to get it from that. She moans a little again. Them horny rocks. Her free hand slides down her jeans and she hits her pipe again with the other, moving in an obvious way. "Oh yeah?" I reply, really thinking, oh hell no, this is not happening. "Hey, since you don't go for this, how about we go pick up some 40s? I'm thinking to myself, oh no. Maybe an ounce. Go back to your place. Have a little fun, Oh fuck no. Actually, I'm a bit broke. I didn't get paid when I should have, you know. Maybe she would be disinterested if I told her I don't have money. But instead, she just frowns, her hand still at it. "Oh, that's okay, baby. You done a lot for me. I just want to pay you back. It's okay. I told you. This was for helping me out. Besides, I just got off work and I'm ready to crash." I may have been a hormonal 19-year-old, but I was not that hormonal. Luckily, I saw her complex come into view, and so did she. She pouted and stopped her little playtime as I pulled up and stopped at the entrance. She packed her items away in her purse and got out, grabbing her bags from the back. She looked back through the passenger window. "You sure though? I could just come back to your place and rape you a bit." I sped off without a second thought, leaving her there in the lot. Through the streets and up the hill, screeching into my parking lot and making a mad dash for the complex. I slammed and locked the door, turning with my back to it, letting out a breath I had been holding in since first escaping what may have been the most ignorant and creepiest night of my life. I was so exhausted. I slid down to the ground and fell asleep, right there at the door. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to check out my good friend Goodnite Goosebumps who helped me out on this video. His channel will be featured in my outro if you want to check him out. Also guys, I wanted to say something before this video ends. I know not all of you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, but I recently posted a message on there talking about the reason my videos may delay at times. I just wanted to let you all know, I'm not going to go in full depth, but I've been having a few health issues, specifically issues with my back. Not being able to sit down and record or edit for more than 15 to 30 minutes without pain or discomfort. It's something I've been dealing with on and off since October. I'm fine, but it's enough of an issue to delay videos here and there. My whole plan for the new year was to actually put out more videos, at least 2 to 3 a week. But these issues are really making that almost impossible. I'm not asking for sympathy, I just want to let you guys know why at times a video may take longer to get out. I'll still be uploading and giving you guys the best content that I can. That'll never change. It just may take longer at times to get the videos out. I love you guys, and as always, thank you for your amazing support. And remember, stay